Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I'm talking about The Bones of the World, Kingdom of Ghosts, Book 3 by Victor Gischler from Athen Books. I think that's how you say it. I don't know, there's the logo. As I said, this is Book 3 of the Kingdom of Ghosts trilogy, and so we have Merrick Niles. He's our main character. In the first book, he steals a map, finds what it leads to. It ends up with him with three ghosts inside of his head. Meanwhile, this is the Scattered Kingdom. Centuries ago, the last king was murdered, and the kingdom just broke up, and now there's just dukes and barons and different people just governing their little parts of the land. There's people from the north that like to raid, murder, and pillage, and I think it's to the west, um, over the mountains, the Arrowhead Mountains. There's essentially communism, the worst kind of communism. It's the Union, and they want to sweep across the land and take over everything. And so there are two opposing factions within the Scattered Kingdom that are trying to put forth their own person for a king to unite the land. With Merrick Niles and our heroes is a young, strapping, handsome, blonde knight, and who may or may not have an actual claim to the throne. And then on the other hand, on the other side, we have this horrific, possibly evil hunchback who has a legitimate claim to the throne. He is a descendant of the king. And so their forces are clashing while they have to worry about the Union sweeping in, and there's all sorts of intrigue and things going on, and that leads us to the bones of the world, all sorts of stuff going on, and the main clash between the two kings and their followers, and Merrick Niles in the middle of all this. Excuse me. When I, well, first of all, for the too long, didn't watch, folks, 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved this. So there's that. Now, when I read the first book, I finished it, had a decent stopping point. Wasn't the end of the story, but it was a fine stopping point for me to read a few other things. So it was a month or so before I got to book two. When I finished book two, I had planned to do the same thing, but at the end of book two, there was no way I wasn't going to carry on immediately and read the third book. The ending of that book was just compelling. So I dove right into this. This is 600 pages, and I flew through it as quickly as I could. I find it compelling. The writing is very straightforward. It doesn't get bogged down like maybe J.R.R. Tolkien and some people that write that kind of thing. The characters are just compelling, and this is the type of story you do not know who will live, who will die, how things are going to turn out. Craziness. There are some shocking moments in this story. In the last video for book two, I talked about what I call the triangle of fantasy. I don't remember if that's actually what I called it, but I said there's a triangle of fantasy, and in one corner you have Conan the Barbarian and this very pulpy kind of fantasy. And then in the other corner here, you have Dungeons and Dragons, Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms type of stuff, bands of adventurers going on adventures. Although I know there's more to it than that. And then at the top corner is Lord of the Rings, J.R.R. Tolkien, these epic fantasy writers that build incredibly detailed worlds create their own language. These really dense stories. And the Kingdom of Ghosts, I put dead center of that triangle. He builds, Victor Gischler builds the world, but it's close enough to the real world that he doesn't have to do a lot. He's not making up languages and things. Um, it's not incredibly pulpy. It's not adventurers going out on adventures. There are heroes, there are villains, there are anti heroes, there are people switching sides, there's politics, um, there's violence. Just also there are magicians. There's a little bit of creatures, but there's no elves, there's no trolls, there's no goblins. There may be mention. I'm trying to remember if anyone mentions like an ogre, but essentially everybody's human. There are people that can use magic, but there are some creatures out there. One of the things I really liked about this, it reminded me of, I believe it's Foundation, and mainly with the Union people, and a little bit with a couple of other people. They, excuse me, they talk about their plans. Here's our battle plan. And then we have them reconvening and talking about what happened in the battle. And it's done in such a way that, and there's so much other stuff going on, that I don't miss not having every little thing shown to me. It is a case, a bit of tell, don't show. But if they were going to show everything, then this would have either been a 10-book series, or these books each would have been over 1,000 pages. But I believe it's the Foundation series where I first came across this, where they, people will meet and say, this is what we need to do. And then they'll meet again and be like, well, this is what happened. And we have some of that in here, but it is the initial meeting, this is what we need to do, and then a bunch of other stuff going on because there are so many characters and so many things happening. And then eventually we get back to them meeting again and saying, this is how things turned out. If you don't like that, I don't know what to tell you. It's a fantastic book. That didn't bother me at all. I thought it worked well for conveying what needed to be conveyed without bogging things down or making the book way too long. When you have so many characters and so much story going on, and you're trying to fit it in just 600 pages, it's not a bad way to do things if it's handled well, and I think Victor Gischler does. I don't want to go into too much detail. You can see there's some battle going on. There's a siege. There's fighting on the seas. There's magic being thrown about. There's, as I said, there's characters dying. There's characters changing sides. It's tragic. I was heartbroken a number of times. And I was surprised by the end. I really, really like the final few pages where everything sort of ends up. Victor Gischler has written some other fantasy stuff, and I think I'm going to pick that up and give that a try. I don't think it's in the same world, even though, having read a sample of one of those, they do curse to the same god. But he's a crime writer. He's written science fiction, little touch of horror, lots of comic book stuff. And so this is my first bit of his fantasy that I've read. I loved it. Definitely want to check out more of it. So I think I covered everything. I don't want to give anything away. So Bones of the World, Kingdom of Ghosts, Book 3 by Victor Gischler. 5 out of 5 stars. I gave the book 2 5 out of 5 stars. I gave book 1 4.5 out of 5 stars. Overall, I loved the whole series. The series as a whole, 5 out of 5. Absolutely loved it. If you want to read fantasy, if you're into fantasy, unless you're if you're just into the high fantasy like Lord of the Rings and that type of stuff, this might not be up your alley. But if you're just a general fantasy fan or thinking of giving it a try, I highly recommend this whole series. And I mean, you can do whatever you want, but it is one whole story. So don't start with this. Start with book one. And that's it. Question for this video. Do I have a question for this video? Pardon me. I don't have anything to drink, so I'm getting a little parched. What's your favorite trilogy? How's that for a question? Book trilogy. If you're really desperate, can't think of a book trilogy, I'll let you go with movies. But, we're talking about books here. What is your favorite book trilogy? And I suppose if it's originally a trilogy that continued on as a series, that's fine. For me, really not, again, as always, didn't think ahead. But, so I'm looking around to see if anything catches my eye. Right off the bat, like my first thought is either The Rising by Brian Keene or the Earthworm Gods by Brian Keene. They're both, I don't know if they're technically trilogies. With The Rising, you had Rising, City of the Dead, and then Rising Selected Scenes from the End of the World, which is a short story collection that takes place in that world. And then he's added some stuff to it. Conqueror Worms is kind of the same thing. You have, or Earthworm Gods 2, and then Earthworm Gods Selected Scenes from the End of the World. There's a bunch of short stories that take place in that world. I can't think of any other trilogies off the top of my head. The Big Head trilogy by Edward Lee is a lot of fun. Although it starts off like not the Big Head, Header. The Header trilogy. Header starts off, I think, as a pretty straightforward extreme horror novel. And then Header 2 and Header 3 really go nuts. Like over the top into funny stuff. It's so over the top you have to laugh at it. I don't know that there's any laughing in the original Header. So yeah, I as always didn't think ahead, so don't really have a good answer myself, but there's a few things I tossed out there. Again, looking around, the Wolf Hunt trilogy by Jeff Strand, really good. I gave the third book in the trilogy a slightly lower rating than the first two, but overall, it's fun. It's horrific. They're good books. That's a great trilogy. So, what about you? What are your favorite trilogies or 3-book story or however you want to look at it? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. And if you'd care to follow me on other social media, my Twitter is @Ronan5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is ErikSmith5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. If you're on Blue Sky, I am @ELSmith. That's all I have. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith. And until next time, read more books.